Chapter 1: The Dinner That Shouldn't Have Happened. I thought Thanksgiving dinner would just be awkward until my grandmother calmly asked why strangers were living in the lake house she'd bought for me years ago. I didn't even know that house existed. In that moment, I realized my family had been quietly controlling my money, my credit, even my future, while convincing me I was just bad with life. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how I discovered my own family's betrayal and why my revenge didn't involve yelling, threats, or violence, only patience, paperwork, and watching the truth finally catch up. I did not want to come home that year. Thanksgiving had always been complicated, but by 2024, it felt like a ritual I participated in out of obligation rather than warmth. I drove back to my parents' house in a quiet suburb outside Naperville, Illinois, telling myself it would only be one evening, a few polite conversations, and then I could leave again. The house looked the same as it always had: white siding, perfect lawn, a wreath on the door that suggested cheer without ever quite delivering it. Inside, the air smelled like roasted turkey and butter, familiar and heavy. My mother moved between the kitchen and dining room with forced energy. My father stood near the counter pretending to watch football while really watching everyone else. I felt out of place before I even sat down. That had been my role for years, the one who never quite fit, the one whose life did not unfold on the timeline my parents approved of. My younger sister Rachel was already there with her husband Mark, settled comfortably at the table, laughing too loudly at something trivial. They looked relaxed in a way I never did in that house. I took my seat, folded my hands in my lap, and reminded myself to keep things light. No politics, no money, no explanations about my work contracts or why I still rented. Just get through dinner. Then my grandmother arrived. Eleanor Brooks walked in slowly, supported by a cane she rarely needed but liked to use when it suited her. She had flown in from Florida 2 days earlier, and it was the first time I had seen her in almost 3 years. The room shifted when she entered. Conversation softened. My parents straightened instinctively. Even Rachel lowered her voice. My grandmother had always carried a quiet authority. She never raised it. She never needed to. Everyone in our family understood exactly who she was and what she represented. She kissed my cheek, warm and deliberate, and held my face for a moment longer than expected, studying me as if she were committing something to memory. I felt suddenly exposed. Dinner began normally enough. Plates passed, polite questions exchanged. My mother asked about traffic, my father commented on the weather, Rachel talked about a new marketing campaign at her firm, the kind of story that ended with everyone admiring her drive and polish. My grandmother listened more than she spoke. She asked small questions, precise ones. How long I had been on my current contract, whether I liked my apartment, if I was still commuting into the city. I answered honestly but briefly. Halfway through the meal, just as my father was reaching for more gravy, my grandmother looked directly at me and asked something that did not belong among mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. She asked how the lake house was holding up. The table went still. At first, I assumed I had misheard her. I smiled politely, waiting for clarification that never came. My grandmother tilted her head slightly, patient. "The lake house," she repeated calmly. "The one I bought for you a few years back, in Wisconsin. I was just there last week." My chest tightened. I could feel heat rising in my face, confusion rushing in faster than embarrassment. I had no idea what she was talking about. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Before I could speak, my mother laughed. It was a quick laugh, sharp and too eager. She waved her hand dismissively and said that Eleanor must be mixing things up. "Travel does that sometimes," she added. "Different properties start to blur together." My father nodded along, a fraction of a second too late. He said something about how the house on the lake belonged to Rachel and Mark. It always had. Maybe Eleanor was remembering it wrong. Rachel did not look at me. She smiled instead, a smooth, practiced expression, and said that yes, they had been spending more time up there recently. It was good for Mark's stress. Everyone needed a getaway these days. I stared at her, my mind struggling to catch up. A lake house, purchased for me, a few years back, none of it aligned with the reality I knew. My grandmother did not argue. She did not correct. She simply rested her hands on the table and waited. Then she said something else. She said that when she visited the property last week, she expected to see me. Instead, the door had been opened by an older couple she had never met. They introduced themselves as the homeowners and seemed confused by her presence. No one spoke. The silence pressed down on us, thick and uncomfortable. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Rachel shifted in her chair, suddenly interested in adjusting her napkin. I felt like the ground had tilted. An older couple, homeowners, in a house my grandmother claimed she'd bought for me. The words echoed in my head, colliding with everything I thought I understood about my life. I looked at my parents, searching for some kind of explanation. My father avoided my eyes. My mother focused intently on her plate. Rachel began talking again, too fast this time, filling the space with unnecessary details about renovations and property taxes and how confusing real estate could be. It was obvious now, too obvious. My grandmother watched them all carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not accuse. She simply observed, her gaze moving from face to face, cataloging every reaction. I realized then that she was not surprised, not really. She finished her meal quietly, as if nothing remarkable had happened, and asked my mother to pass the bread. Conversation resumed, in a fractured way, never recovering its rhythm. No one mentioned the lake house again, but everything had changed. I sat there, nodding when appropriate, answering questions on autopilot. Inside, my thoughts were racing. I replayed the exchange over and over, searching for logic. If there was a house, if it had been meant for me, how could I not know about it? The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. After dessert, as plates were cleared and coffee poured, my grandmother squeezed my hand gently under the table. Her grip was firm, grounding. She said nothing. She did not need to. When I finally left that night, the cold air outside felt sharper than usual. I sat in my car for a long moment before turning the key, staring at the house I'd grown up in, seeing it differently now. A single question followed me all the way back to my apartment. If there really had been a house with my name attached to it, and everyone else seemed to know about it, how had I been left out of the truth? Chapter 2. How my life was quietly erased. The question followed me for days, settling into every quiet moment like a low hum I could not turn off. I went back to my apartment, back to my routines, back to a life that suddenly felt flimsy and provisional. I started replaying the last decade in my head, not as a series of personal failures, but as a pattern I had never thought to question. In 2016, I was 30 years old and newly settled into what I believed was a solid career path. I worked as an operations analyst on contract for mid-sized logistics and retail firms around Chicago. The work was technical, detail-heavy, and demanding. I was good at it. My supervisors said so often enough. My paychecks were steady, not impressive, but respectable. On paper, I should have been fine. Yet, I was always short on money. Every contract ended the same way. A manager would pull me aside near the end of a project and say they wished they could extend me. Budgets were tightening, leadership was restructuring, maybe next quarter, maybe next year. I would smile, thank them, and move on to the next short-term role. When I mentioned this at family dinners, my parents had an explanation ready. My father would say contract work was unstable by nature. My mother would sigh and tell me I needed more consistency. Rachel would tilt her head and say her company valued loyalty and long-term vision. The implication was always the same. The problem was me. I believed them. By 2018, I noticed something else. My savings never seemed to grow. I tracked expenses carefully, cooked at home, avoided vacations. Still, my balance hovered just above uncomfortable. When I mentioned it to my mother, she offered to help review my paperwork. She had always been good with numbers. I was tired and grateful, and I agreed. She said it was probably nothing, just taxes, just timing. Around 2019, the real trouble started. I applied for a car loan and was approved at an interest rate that made the loan officer hesitate. She glanced at her screen, then back at me, and suggested I might want to check my credit report. There were flags she could not explain: missed payments, irregular activity. I felt my face burn as I nodded, embarrassed by something I did not understand. When I told my parents, my mother looked concerned but not surprised. She said credit scores were tricky and that she had warned me about managing things better. She offered again to help. I let her. It felt easier than arguing. The next year, my credit card limit was reduced without warning. Then another card froze entirely. I spent an afternoon on hold with a customer service agent who spoke carefully, telling me there were discrepancies tied to my profile. She suggested I submit additional documentation. When I hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the wall, feeling like I had missed a crucial step everyone else understood. I called my mother. She told me not to panic. She said apartments were competitive. She said maybe it was not the right fit. Her voice was soothing, practiced. She told me she would look into it. I wanted to believe her. It was only later, lying awake in the dark, that a memory surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. A business trip in 2017. I had been rushing to catch a flight. My mother had handed me a stack of papers and asked me to sign quickly so she could help manage some things while I was away. I trusted her. I barely glanced at the forms. At the time, it felt harmless, responsible even. Now, the memory sat heavy in my chest. By 2023, I had internalized the narrative completely. I told myself I was bad with money, that my career choices were flawed, that my sister had simply done better. I leaned on my parents more than I wanted to, accepted their help, and with it, their quiet control. Looking back, I can see how neatly it all fit together. The stalled career, the damaged credit, the housing rejections, each piece small enough to dismiss on its own. Together, they formed a cage I didn't know I was in. I did not yet have proof. I did not yet have the courage to accuse anyone of anything, but the certainty had taken root. My life had not unraveled by accident. It had been guided there, gently and deliberately, by hands I had trusted the most. And once I saw that, I could not unsee it. Chapter 3. They never thought I'd notice. Something in me shifted after that realization. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that I stopped moving through my days on autopilot. I went back to work, answered emails, showed up to meetings, but my attention had sharpened. I was listening now, not to respond, but to notice. Over the next 2 weeks, I stayed in closer contact with my family than usual, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I returned calls, I accepted invitations, I let conversations stretch longer than comfort would normally allow. I asked harmless questions and then stayed quiet. They filled the silence for me. My sister Rachel was the first to slip. We met for coffee near her office in Oak Brook, a place she chose because it made her feel important. She talked about work, about stress, about how hard it was to juggle everything. Then, casually, she mentioned that managing family assets took more time than people realized. I looked up from my cup. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She waved her hand. "You know, investments, properties, paperwork. Mom and Dad handle most of it, but sometimes I help. It is a lot of responsibility." I waited. She smiled at me. "It is not really your thing anyway. You have enough on your plate." The words landed softly, but they stayed with me. A few days later, my father called. He asked how I was doing, how work was going, whether I was thinking about the future. His tone was gentle, almost rehearsed. "I have been meaning to talk to you about something," he said. "Just some paperwork, nothing urgent." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. "Just making sure everything is clear moving forward," he said. "Powers, authorizations. It protects everyone." I felt my pulse quicken. Protects from what? He laughed lightly. From confusion, from misunderstandings. We met that weekend at their house. My mother set out folders on the dining table, neat and color-coded. She slid one toward me. "It's just an update," she said. "We want to simplify things." I flipped through the pages without really reading them. My hands felt steady, but my chest did not. Words like authorization and representative and financial decisions blurred together. "I want to take these with me," I said. My father frowned. "There's no need." "I want to read them," I repeated. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over the folder. "We trust you," she said softly. "You should trust us too." I smiled and pulled the folder back anyway. That night, Rachel texted me. "You did not need to make things awkward," she wrote. "I did not. I just asked for time." She did not respond. A few days later, she invited me over to her place. Mark was out of town, she said. It would be nice to talk. Her condo was immaculate, staged within an inch of its life. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, knees angled away from each other. She sighed dramatically. "I'm worried about you," I asked. "Why?" She said, "You seem stressed, defensive." I let her continue. "You've always struggled with big picture stuff, money, planning. It's not a criticism, it's just reality." "I manage my life," I said. She smiled in that same practiced way. "Within limits, that's all I'm saying." There it was. "I would hate for you to make a mistake," she added, "something that could not be undone." I met her eyes. "What kind of mistake?" She leaned back. "Signing something you don't understand, or refusing help when you need it." For a moment, the room felt smaller. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine," I said. She studied me, clearly weighing something. Then she stood and started clearing empty glasses, the conversation dismissed. I left with my hands shaking. The next morning, I called the bank. I had avoided it for years, intimidated by hold music and automated menus, but this time I stayed on the line. Eventually, a woman named Naomi Brooks came on. Her voice was calm, professional. "I want to review my account history and any authorizations attached to my name," I said. She asked for verification, then paused. "There are several linked documents," she said. "May I ask, did you grant power of attorney to anyone?" My stomach dropped. "Why do you ask?" I asked. "It's noted here," she replied, "from several years ago." My throat felt tight. "To whom?" She said, "Your mother, Linda Harper." I closed my eyes. "I don't remember that," I said. "It happens," Naomi said gently, "but it would explain certain activity." "What kind of activity?" I asked. She hesitated. "I recommend coming in to review everything in person." We scheduled an appointment for the following week. I hung up and sat very still. Everything I had ignored, excused, rationalized was lining up now. The stalled progress, the quiet pressure, the way every decision funneled back through my parents without me realizing it. They never needed to control me outright. They simply convinced me I was incapable of controlling myself. They were wrong. Chapter 4. The Receipts They Didn't Plan For. The shift from suspicion to certainty did not happen overnight, but once it began, it moved with a quiet force I could not stop. January arrived cold and gray, and with it came my grandmother's decision to stop observing and start acting. She called me early one morning and asked if I could come over. Her voice was steady, the way it always was when she had already made up her mind. When I arrived at her rental townhouse outside Sarasota, she was seated at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a neat stack of folders. "We are going to do this properly," she said. "No guessing, no emotion." She had already contacted Richard Cole, a civil attorney based in Madison, Wisconsin, who specialized in property disputes and financial abuse cases. 2 days later, we sat across from him in a small conference room with frosted glass walls. He listened without interrupting as my grandmother spoke, occasionally glancing at me to confirm details. When she finished, he folded his hands. "What you are describing," he said, "is not uncommon, but it is serious." He brought in Daniel Reyes, a forensic accountant he worked with regularly. Daniel was quiet, methodical, the kind of person who made notes while others talked. They asked for everything: bank statements, emails, old tax filings, any document with a signature. The process was slow. Weeks passed as they traced timelines and matched records. I continued going to work, answering emails, pretending my life was normal while my past was dismantled page by page. By early February, patterns emerged. Daniel showed us how a power of attorney filed in late 2017 had been used far beyond its original scope. It allowed my mother, Linda Harper, to make financial decisions on my behalf without notifying me. Transfers, authorizations, signatures that looked like mine but felt distant when I saw them again. Richard explained that in 2019, the lake house in northern Wisconsin had been transferred using that authority. The notary involved had failed to verify my presence or intent properly. It was a procedural failure that opened the door to everything that followed. Rental income from the property had been deposited into an account my mother controlled. The bank had flagged the activity more than once. Notes were added to the file. No one told me. I felt numb as the pieces settled into place. There was no single moment of shock, just a growing heaviness as the truth became undeniable. By March, Richard said we were ready. He suggested a second family meeting. Not a confrontation, he clarified, but a disclosure. He wanted reactions. He wanted statements made without preparation. My grandmother agreed. We met on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. The same dining room, the same table. The familiarity felt surreal. My father, Thomas Harper, greeted us with forced cheer. My mother looked wary. Rachel arrived last, perfectly composed, Mark close behind her. Richard and Daniel sat beside my grandmother. I took the chair nearest the door. Richard began calmly, introducing himself and explaining his role. He placed the folders on the table one by one. These documents, he said, outline a series of financial actions taken on behalf of my client's granddaughter without her informed consent. My father leaned back in his chair. That is not accurate. Richard did not respond immediately. He opened the first folder and slid a document forward. This is the power of attorney signed in November 2017. It granted limited authority for administrative purposes. It did not authorize property transfer. My mother's face drained of color. Rachel crossed her arms. You are making this sound worse than it is. Daniel spoke for the first time. The transfer of the Wisconsin property occurred in June 2019. The notary record does not show the principal present. My father stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Richard raised a hand. Please sit down. The room felt charged, every breath audible. My grandmother finally spoke. I began noticing inconsistencies in 2023, documents that did not align, explanations that shifted. Rachel stared at her. You never said anything. I wanted to see who would tell the truth, my grandmother replied. She looked at me then. The dinner last November was not a coincidence. Silence followed. My mother pressed her lips together. My father rubbed his forehead. Rachel said nothing. Richard closed the last folder. At this point, we have sufficient evidence to initiate recovery of the property and pursue civil remedies. Are you threatening us? My father asked. I am informing you of what will happen next. No one was arrested. No one shouted. The power in the room shifted all the same. As we left, my grandmother placed her hand on my back. It was a small gesture, steadying. Outside, the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer something I carried alone. Chapter 5. Karma Doesn't Raise Its Voice. In the weeks that followed, everything moved with the steady momentum of paperwork and consequence. There were no dramatic midnight arrests, no shouting matches in the street, no moment where someone fell to their knees and begged. It was quieter than that, and somehow heavier. By April 2025, Richard filed the civil action in Wisconsin to unwind the 2019 transfer and freeze any proceeds tied to the lake property. Daniel's accounting report went with it, a clean timeline that showed the power of attorney being used well beyond what any reasonable person would consider limited or temporary. Naomi's compliance notes from the bank became part of the record too, confirming that the activity had been flagged, reviewed, and never disclosed to me. My mother tried to play it off at first. She called me, voice soft, as if she were checking in on a sick child. "You are letting them scare you," she said. "This is going to ruin the family." I held the phone away from my ear for a second, not because she was loud, but because the familiarity of her tone made my stomach turn. "It did not ruin the family," I said. "It revealed it." She went quiet, then snapped back into control. "You are being manipulated by your grandmother," she said. "You have always been vulnerable to her drama." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because she still believed the old script worked. When Richard notified my parents' attorney that the rental income was being traced and potentially subject to restitution, my mother stopped calling. My father called instead, trying a different approach, practical, reasonable, disappointed. "You could have come to us," he said. "You did not need lawyers." "I did come to you," I replied, "for years. You just never told me the truth." He exhaled sharply, as if I were being unfair. "You are not thinking about how this looks," he said. "People talk." "People will talk either way," I said. "At least now they will be talking about facts." By May, the bank placed holds on accounts connected to the rental deposits and any transfers that had moved through my mother's control. I did not feel victorious when I saw the notification. I felt something closer to relief, like a door finally locking after years of being left open. Rachel lost her composure first. She showed up at my apartment one afternoon without warning, hair pulled back too tight, mascara slightly smeared. She stood in the hallway like she had forgotten how to step inside. "You did this," she said. I blinked at her. I did not ask what she meant. I already knew. "My job is on the line," she said. "They called me into HR. They asked about the investigation, about my financial disclosures, about why my name is connected to property transfers." I leaned against the doorframe, my heartbeat steady. "They are asking because it is real," I said. Her eyes flashed. "You are acting like you are better than me." I shook my head. "I am acting like I am done." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You do not understand what you are doing to Mom and Dad," she said. "Dad is going to lose everything. Mom cannot work if this gets out." I looked at her for a long moment. I wanted to feel rage. I wanted to feel triumph. Instead, I felt tired. "You do understand what they did to me," I said. "You just decided it did not matter." Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence between us felt like a line being drawn. She left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, she was placed on leave and then quietly let go. No public scandal, no dramatic announcement, just a sudden absence from the job she used to brag about. Mark stopped posting cheerful pictures online. Their social circle, the polished suburban circle that thrived on appearances, shifted away from them like water around a rock. My father's consequences came from the community he cared about most. He sat on a local advisory board and a neighborhood planning committee, positions he treated like proof of respectability. When word spread that he was involved in a property dispute and financial investigation, people did not confront him directly. They just stopped returning calls. Meetings were rescheduled without him. Invitations disappeared. Someone suggested he take a step back until things were resolved. He did because he had no choice. My mother's consequences were more concrete. She did freelance bookkeeping and tax prep, the kind of work built on trust. Once Richard's filings referenced her professional role in her handling of funds, her clients started asking questions. Then a couple of them left, then more. A local association requested documentation. She was advised to pause services during review. She told friends it was temporary. She told my aunt it was a misunderstanding. She told herself it would blow over. but I could see it in her eyes the last time I saw her, that stunned fear of someone realizing there is no more story left that will save them. In June, the court granted an order restoring the lake house to the proper chain of ownership, pending final resolution. Richard called me with the news while I was sitting at my desk in a borrowed co-working space. It's not the end, but it is a major step. When I drove north to Wisconsin for the first time, the road felt like a long exhale. Pines lined the highway. The air changed as I got closer to the water, cooler and cleaner. I pulled into the gravel driveway and sat there for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, staring at a house that had been mine without me ever knowing it. It was quiet. No strangers at the door. No hidden voices inside. Just stillness. I walked through the room slowly. I did not rush to claim it. I touched the windowsill, the banister, the kitchen counter. Not because it was luxurious, but because it was real. It existed. It had been withheld from me like a secret, and now it was simply there. That night, I slept with the windows cracked, listening to the wind move through trees. For the first time in years, my body rested without bracing for the next problem. I thought I would feel something sharper, a clean satisfaction. Instead, the best feeling was ordinary, safety, the kind of calm people take for granted when their lives aren't being quietly steered by someone else. My mother visited later that summer. She sat with me on the back steps, wrapped in a sweater despite the mild evening. She watched the lake like she was watching time itself. "You did not do anything wrong," she said. I swallowed, eyes stinging unexpectedly. "I know," I said. "I just wish I had known sooner." She nodded once. "That's the point. Now you know." When I returned to Illinois for a brief hearing update in July, I saw my parents at the courtroom. They looked smaller than I remembered, not because they had changed physically, but because the mask had slipped. Without control, they did not know how to hold themselves. We did not speak. Afterwards, I walked out into bright sunlight and realized something else. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about my next contract, my next plan, my own choices. They were no longer the center of my life. That was the real shift. Karma doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrives like paperwork, like closed doors, like silence where attention used to be. Sometimes it's simply the world adjusting back into alignment. If you have ever had that gut feeling that something in your life was being managed without your consent, if you've ever been told you were too sensitive or too unstable to trust your own instincts, I want to ask you something. How long would you wait before you looked straight at the pattern and called it what it is? And if you have lived through something like this, tell me what you did next.